Welcome. Let's talk a little bit about how we should be compiling our projects. Now, when I first made this course, live coding was relatively new, and it was an exciting new feature. Live coding is supposed to be able to allow you to compile while the Unreal Engine editor is open, and you can make changes quickly in your code and see those changes reflected in the Unreal Engine editor. Now, live coding has some issues, and if not used properly, it can actually corrupt some of the constructs in your project. So in this video, I just want to outline some best practices when it comes to creating new classes and compiling your C++ code. Now, I personally don't prefer using live coding these days, as it does have some issues. And there are some things that you can use live coding for, namely adding changes in your function bodies and CPP files, but you don't want to use live coding for any changes in your header files. So I've done this a couple times in this course, and that's actually incorrect. You should not do that, as this can result in corruption. So my preferred workflow is to actually close the Unreal Engine editor every time I want to compile my changes. Now, that can be difficult if you're creating new C++ classes, of course. If you want to create a new C++ class from within the Unreal Engine editor using the Unreal Engine class creation wizard by going to Tools and selecting New C++ class and, say, creating a new actor and clicking Create Class, it's going to kick off live coding. So why should we not use live coding if it's a feature built into the engine? Well, what it does is it patches running native code, which is never reliable. It really only works reliably for function body changes. For anything else, like header changes, for example, you should close the editor and compile from the IDE. Attempting to modify a header file with a reflected type, for instance, something with the U property, will result in Unreal Engine trying to re-instance any of the objects of that type, which is a process that happens to corrupt your blueprints regularly. Re-instancing is what it sounds like, creating a new instance of objects of that type, and this is a setting that can actually be disabled in the engine. We can turn off re-instancing altogether, which is, in general, a good measure we can take. You can go to your editor preferences and search for re-instancing, and you can uncheck this setting for Enable Re-instancing. This is in Settings for recompiling C++ code while the engine is running. I prefer to turn this off, and lots of developers recommend disabling this in general. Now, my preferred workflow for creating C++ classes and compiling them, as I mentioned, is with the editor closed. So I typically close the Unreal Engine editor while I'm working, and I open my C++ project in my IDE, whether that's Visual Studio or Writer. Now, if you're using Visual Studio, you can go to your Visual Studio installer. It looks like I need to update my Visual Studio Community 2022, and I recommend always keeping up to date with the latest version. But you can modify, and under Installation Details in Game Development with C++, there's a relatively new feature called Unreal Engine Support. You can enable that, and if you do, you can create C++ classes from directly in your IDE. You can right-click on a folder, select Add, and choose Unreal Engine Item. And this allows you to create an Unreal Engine class directly in your IDE without having the Unreal Engine editor open. So if I want to create this My Class, which is a terrible name for a class, but for demonstration purposes, I can click Add. And there are some common Unreal Engine classes you can choose from, such as Actor. And you can even choose the module. Now, I created this test project called Compiling, so it would go into my primary game module here, as you can create multiple modules in your project. So I can go ahead and click OK, and I'll actually get a new actor class. And I can make code changes here in the IDE and compile here as well. So this is my preferred method, and you can do this in Writer as well. You can simply create a new class. Now, if Visual Studio tells you that it needs to reload, you can click Reload All, and you should get your class. Now, Visual Studio can be slow with its IntelliSense, so you could see some red squiggles here, and it may take some time to catch up, but you should be able to compile your code. If you get a successful compile, then you're fine. So as you can see, I was able to successfully compile my code. So these are actually false red squiggles. If you see errors in your error list, those are false errors. You only want to look at your Output tab. I prefer to close the error list because it doesn't give me useful information for Unreal Engine. So I right-click on it and I close it. Now, one common misconception is that some students think that you need to regenerate your project files every time you compile or add a new class, and this is not true. Notice that I just waited a few moments and my red squiggles went away, so I did not need to regenerate my project files. Regenerating your project files is only something you have to do when you have cached or corrupted files in your project. So in general, my modern recommended workflow is to make your C++ changes in the IDE and compile in the IDE with the Unreal Engine editor closed. And if you'd like to learn more about the proper way to compile your project and more information about live coding, I recommend going to the Fact channel in the Druid Mechanics Discord, where I discuss the problems with live coding and have a little bit more information about it. And I've even included some information from Unreal Source, formerly known as Unreal Slackers. Shout out to Blue Man, who gave me some information about what is fine and not fine with live coding. So in general, you can do these things with live coding, and it outlines some things you shouldn't do with live coding. Now, I personally prefer not to use live coding these days, so even though you'll see me doing it here and there throughout the course, my newest recommendation is not to use it at all, and just compile your changes with the editor closed, as that's how most software is developed. And remember, you don't have to regenerate your project files. And what I mean by that is deleting intermediate and binaries, and right-clicking on your U project and generating Visual Studio project files. So generating your project files is not necessary when creating a new C++ class or compiling your code changes. So that's my preferred workflow, and that's what I recommend, is making your C++ changes in the IDE with the editor closed and compiling with the editor closed as well. And when you're ready to test it in the engine, you can go ahead and launch the Unreal Engine editor. But do check out the FAQ in the Druid Mechanics Discord for more information on live coding and how you can properly use it. I'll see you soon.